Hello, Dark Reader, and welcome to the Dark Side of the Library podcast. I'm your host, Katie. If you are over on YouTube, you will see my crazy hair. I had a crazy long weekend, so, I just was, not dealing with this. It was not cooperating, so I hope you enjoy it. So today on this minisode, it's been a while since we've done one of these. I'm actually going to talk about a new book that I read over the weekend. It is Ghost Eaters, and this is by Clay McLeod Chapman. So this one was really interesting. I remember when we were doing our monthly curated books back in 2022. I think it was released around April-ish. And they were talking about drug addiction and this substance called Ghost. And basically they're like, do you want to get haunted? And it's this whole thing where you trip on this thing that's called Ghost, and it reveals ghosts, essentially. So when you take it, you are immersed into the world of the undead, not zombies, but ghosts and all the phantoms and all that cool stuff. It sounded really interesting. It was a little too close to home for me for a while, but I did notice that it made the 2022 best horror, novel list. So then I decided, you know what? Let's read it. Let me tell you a little bit more about who Clay McLeod Chapman is. He's done a lot of different material. He's written comic books or written for comics. He's done books. Some examples of that are Whisper Down the Lane, The Remaking, and Miss Corpus. Also, he's contributed to films and even performances. So he's done a lot. I mean, seriously, he's done a lot of stuff. Definitely check out his stuff. I have not personally read this, but I have seen a lot of people recommend his particular book, Whispering Down the Lane and The Remaking. They both have done very well as far as audience performance reviews have gone, at least on Goodreads. So that's definitely a book I would pick up. Unfortunately, there was not the same reception to Ghost Eaters necessarily. Now, let me go through what the synopsis is of Ghost Eaters. The setting of the story takes place in Richmond, Virginia. There's a lot of rich history. It's which is kind of the beginning of the book, is that all the locals know about all of these historical events, the people. There's just a lot of history in Virginia. So that's kind of actually how the book starts. We start with Erin, our protagonist. She has been in an on and off again relationship with her boyfriend. Well, not now, but was Silas. And we get a whole scene with them and kind of how that began. So Silas, unfortunately, is addicted to drugs. And she always is somebody that has to bail him out, etc. And now they actually find him deceased from an overdose. This, of course, is heart-wrenching, and she doesn't really know what to do with all of this because her friends, Silas, everybody used to just look up to Silas and do what Silas says. Throughout the books, there's Silas says this, almost like Simon says. Anyway, so a friend comes by and is like, hey, there's this drug called Ghost, and basically this drug allows people to see the dead. So Erin, because things happen and she's grieving, she's like, you know what? Yes, I want to get haunted. And she wants to see Silas again. She wants to talk to him. She's mad at him. There's so many things, if you've ever experienced grieving yourself, if somebody really close to you has passed away, there's all the levels, right? So this drug is the worst of all drugs. It's highly addictive. So once you take it once, you just cannot stop. And a part of this, I think, is symbolic of the fact that we constantly, clearly it's symbolic of just drug use in general and how addictive, especially, things like heroin, fentanyl, etc. It's hard to cut loose from those things. But if there is an attachment to being able to connect and see people who have deceased, people that you love and have passed away, etc. And not only that, but you get to run away from all of your troubles currently. Yeah, you're going to want to take it, but there's other effects as well. So that's kind of what Ghost Eaters is about. It sounded really intriguing, but like I said earlier, I was not sure if I wanted to pick this up. I have had, unfortunately, I think a lot of people can say that they have some direct experience with addiction, whether it's something that they've dealt with themselves or they've watched loved ones, spiral into that, into addiction. And it is really difficult. And I would say that is a huge trigger in this book. So Erin and her friends all have addictive personalities. They're expressed in different ways. Silas is kind of, obviously he OD'd, and Erin she wants to be numb of a lot of things in her life. So this book, I would say, if you are sensitive to drug use or addiction at all, this is not a book you should pick up. So here are kind of my thoughts. The beginning of the story started off pretty strong. We get to learn about the characters. Granted, I did not feel a connection necessarily to anybody. They weren't characters that I personally would attach myself with. But we're also seeing them at their lowest points, so it's kind of hard. And I think that's something that we need to remember too. So I did not connect with any of the characters, but I did enjoy the foundation and learning about their relationships, the friends, how they grew up and where they came from. They're all postgraduates, and they all suffer from some sort of addiction, and why their relationship is still kind of even existing. So we get a glimpse into what toxic relationships look like, especially in the world of addiction. When you bond through addiction, especially in this way, it's very difficult. One, it's hard to find people that you can relate to because you've gone through so many things. Like Erin in the book talks about her friend Amara, who, they would get drunk together and they would always hold each other's hair. And those are just like those moments. I have friends like that, and it's, I know that they have my back in that way. It's weird. So we get those kinds of relationships, but we get how toxic relationships are formed and why people stay in this book. Again, we're talking about addiction, and we are actually viewing it through the lens of somebody who has an addiction and the spiraling as well, especially through a very stressful, traumatic event. So Silas, her ex-boyfriend, somebody has this connection with a very strong connection with, passes away, and she has the availability to take this drug. Regardless of the side effects, which are terrible, especially after taking it, it doesn't matter how terrible the side effects are, because when you're on the drug, so many other things happen, or the anticipation that you'll be able to connect with your loved one. Even when she is basically tripping throughout the entire story, which can be very disgusting and horrifying and terrible, she still has a lot of this hope and whatnot. And I think it's really hard for people to get through this. So what I'm trying to say is this book is not for everybody. I think it really does dive into what addiction looks like, and it honestly looked like a fever dream. So along that line, when I was reading the story, the first part was really great, the lead up to it, and even to the seance where they decide to take this drug and they try to connect with Silas, etc. Things start to spiral out of control, and then there's a lot of these different storylines that are being presented, but it doesn't really feel like any of them get wrapped up. So we're introduced to a lot of ghosts throughout history that Erin is seeing or communicates with or is interacting with, but we don't really get a history. Like, clearly they're trying to be noticed. They have a story to tell, but it just isn't, there's no closure. We also have this whole thing with Silas and her relationship with Silas, that, her idea of a perfect life, even with Silas, that whole thing was wild. But again, I was trying to keep in mind as I was reading the story, she's literally tripping on drugs. But it was so hard because there were certain points and certain things that Clay McLeod Chapman, certain writing techniques that he used that really deterred from some of the creep factor or even just the important messages that he was trying to say, that I was like, ugh, why is this being said? So there was a few of those moments, and then the wrap up of the story was wild, but not necessarily in the best way. It just nothing felt like there was so many loose ends, and nothing felt like it was done. And I can understand why it was so hard to wrap up a story that is about addiction, but it just felt like there were so many strong themes, like the history of the ghosts. You could have focused on that. Addiction and grief, and then the other one could have been toxic relationships in Silas. Points of the story, as I was reading, even while Aaron was kind of tripping, they were sometimes it felt like the story hit this wall and it dragged. Even while she's tripping, amazing. I was like, I just, why is this happening? Even so, I would probably give this book a solid 3. I do have some personal experience with knowing some people that have have addiction issues, and it is interesting to view. And granted, Ghost is not a real drug, but the metaphor, I mean, it's a very strong metaphor, it's right there, is I think one that a lot of people need to understand, but I think in some places it was not, there was a lot of nuance in some places that I felt like should have been very blatant, and then it didn't really flow and end in a good way where you just felt like we're done with this story. It didn't have to be that Erin is healing or that she's clean either. It felt like the story trailed off and then it's gone. So I think the message is really important. I think it's great to learn what it's like to be in other people's shoes. I think that Clay McLeod did a great job with addressing specific things about addiction, grieving even, or toxic relationships, all of those things. I thought he did a pretty interesting thing. The story is very unique. I've never really read a story that was kind of about, all of those themes, but also like taking a drug where you can see ghosts, and these ghosts are a little weird. Parts of the story were sinister and creepy, but it was kind of gross in a lot of other ways. Atmospherically, I thought it was a fairly okay read. So overall, 3-star for me. So check out Ghost Eaters by Clay McLeod Chapman if this is something that appeals to you. Again, trigger warning, it does talk about addiction and drug use, so be careful. So make sure you take care of yourself, of course. That is my summary and feelings towards Ghost Eaters. If you are looking for some other books and other reads, stay tuned every Wednesday and Friday for our podcast episodes and our YouTube videos. You can also join us on our socials on Instagram, Facebook, and our Amazon Live channel. We do horror trivia on Fridays, at least I'm trying to. Sometimes I'm not there, I apologize, but really trying to be there all the time. So join us on all of those platforms. Make sure to spread the word about Dark Side of the Library. If you do know people that love dark reads, gothic, horror, dark fantasy, etc., make sure to guide them our way, rate and review, subscribe, like, all of that fun stuff, and to comment down below on some books that maybe you want to hear about later on, and I'd love to read them. I hope they're good. Thank you guys so much for listening/watching, and we will see you another day.